Now, the race for Wyoming's governor has been heating up. So far, we have Brent Bean, Joseph Kibler, we have Megan Degenfelder, we have Eric Barlow. So already we've got four people in the race. And, if Wyoming's electoral history is any indication, is probably going to be some more. I mentioned earlier on in the program that Aussie fellow, have no idea who he is. But I got word this morning that even though he announced, he's not going to run because he doesn't qualify. So joining me now on the program is Megan Degenfelder. Megan, welcome to the program.
Good morning, David. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, appreciate it. First time on the show. So thank you for making time.
Absolutely.
So let's just start where I begin all of my interviews. And that is, why don't you just take a minute or two and tell my audience about yourself?
Sure. Well, I'm Wyoming born and raised. I come from a sixth-generation ranching family in Wyoming. My family first in the late 1800s ranched near Torrington, and then more recently west of Casper. My grandfather lived in a two-bedroom shack with no electricity or running water, and they took that half section and built it into over 10,000 acres. And so grew up in that ranching family where, the model was really to build something greater than yourself. And I grew up going to public schools in Casper, went to the University of Wyoming. That's where I met my husband. He's from Cheyenne. And built my career in the mineral industry. I worked for one of the nation's leading coal producers up in Gillette. And then before I was superintendent, was working in the oil and gas business. I'm third generation in my family to work for oil and gas companies. And so that really runs in my blood. And then my career has obviously spanned into education. I really believe in energy and education as the two most critical tools that we can offer here in Wyoming. And so that led me to want to run for superintendent as a business person, not as an educator, recognizing that we have to do better to prepare our students for the workforce. And so, with that experience, that's what's led me to this governor's race. I think it's time for a bold conservative leader that's not afraid to really buck the status quo and to make tough decisions. And so that's what's led me here. And so I'm very excited for what's to come.
Great. Now, you use that word conservative, and you mentioned it a couple times in the statement that you sent me for the article on the Open Range record. So first question out of the gate, define that word for me. What does it mean to be a conservative?
Well, a conservative is not necessarily a Republican, right? We have a lot of Republicans, but being a conservative is really holding those values of individuality, of making sure that the government is not encroaching on the rights of people. Our rights were granted to us by God, not by the government. And so to be a conservative is to make sure that we are keeping limited government as limited as possible, to make sure that we're protecting our values of the unborn, of our Second Amendment rights, of making sure that our taxes are low. To me, that's being a conservative, and you don't buckle on your values. Your values are non-negotiable. And so I think that's what's missing in a lot of ways, and what I intend to protect, because you can be a Republican in a lot of ways, but unless you're a conservative and you hold true to those values, then you're not standing for our core beliefs.
I agree, and I'm glad to hear you say that. And Lord knows we've got a lot of Republicans who the word conservative shouldn't be used in the same sentence with them. So let's talk about those ideas of limited government. As one of Wyoming's five statewide elected officials, you have a seat on the SLIB board. Now, there's been a lot of talk about this, and I want to give you a minute to kind of talk about this, because you and I disagree a great deal on a lot of the votes that you've taken on the SLIB board. Let's just talk about the Pronghorn Wind Project. There's been a lot of controversy around that. You voted in favor of it, so tell me why.
Yeah, happy to. I have historically opposed wind development. I mean, as I mentioned, I worked in the coal and oil and gas business. I'm also an economist. And so whenever, companies and industries get free handouts or subsidies, and they're not competing at an even playing field, then we have a problem. I also have a lot of problems with the blinking red lights, with the fact that you can see these things for miles away. And when I worked in the oil and gas business, we were just being, hounded on to have low profile tanks that we had to paint camouflage to protect from birds. We had to have nets. None of these requirements are on the wind industry. And so they have a tremendous unfair advantage. I've tried to balance that with private property rights, as well as our fiduciary duty to maximize revenue on state lands. But look, if a community does not want these projects on their land, then we should not be moving forward with them. And I think the problem that happened here is we did not give enough opportunity for the public to be heard. I'm trying to fix that. I'm trying to fix that vote and make sure that we can proceed based on what the community want, the state want, and what in my gut, how I feel about the wind industry. And so I think at this February meeting, you'll see some movement there. But that also shows that we have a broken system when it comes to our state land board. Our communities are not finding out about what we're doing. And frankly, this goes for government in general, that I don't think we are transparent enough. We are not communicating enough with our people and our communities. And I can tell you, if we would have done that from the front end, I think this vote would have looked very different.
So, I mean, I hear you say that, but it's not just this vote. I mean, there have been a lot of votes on wind. And, you mentioned that you want to reduce the size of government. But the problem is that there's a lot of studies that say these windmills are not profitable without subsidies. And so how do you square those ideas of smaller government and, making sure businesses compete in a free market with votes to prop up an industry that won't exist without government money? I mean, how do you square that?
No, you're right, David. I mean, and how you kill wind is you make it compete with fossil fuels on an even playing field. And fortunately, President Trump and the Big Beautiful Bill really pushed to do that. Unfortunately, it didn't go as far as he had originally intended during markup on that bill. But that's how we kill wind, and that's what we need to do. And so I think, moving forward, I'm not interested in supporting wind. I don't think it's good for us. Like I said, I've tried to balance that in the past with fiduciary and with private property rights. But look, when it's not supported by our community, then we have no business doing that. And so, do I regret that vote? Yes. I mean, we're gonna move forward and prioritize the projects that mean the most to Wyoming. And that's why I'm endorsed by President Donald Trump. He knows my record with the fossil fuel business. He knows that I have that experience there to make sure that that's our priority. We're not interested in letting everyone play. We're interested in who can compete, who can provide energy, and that's the fossil fuel industry.
Okay, so I want to stay on this whole idea of picking winners and losers for just a minute. But during the last legislative session, there was a pretty big controversy about the governor's matching funds. As governor, Mark Gordon has hundreds of millions of dollars at his discretion. Should the governor have the ability to dole out cash in any way that he sees fit, or just talk to me about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is why the relationship with the legislature is so important, because that's really the check and balance that has to exist. We can't just unilaterally be funding one business over the other. That's, again, I'm a free market economist, and that's a problem when we can do that. I think we need to look to how we build the Energy Authority, the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming, to really propel the energy industry forward. And I've always had a problem with that, being able to really pick winners and losers. And that's why it has to be a balance with the legislature.
Okay, now I try really hard on this program to be responsive to my viewers. I mean, all day long. When I published that article about your pre-announcement endorsement, whatever we want to call that, I got a lot of questions. And one of the big ones was, you're an economist. Why did you go to school in China to become an economist? It seems to be kind of contradictory to me.
Well, first I went to school at the University of Wyoming. That's where I earned my degree in economics. But look, for me, I'm the type of person that I'm going to jump down the throat of the lion. And to know your enemy is the best way to defeat your enemy. China is our enemy. Thank God we have President Trump that has been able to lead, so strongly in that regard. I think more people should know and experience what is going on around the world and what's at stake in America. I think we've gotten too complacent with that. Too many Americans take for granted the rights that we have here. My experience in China has taught me so many things. Go through the list. Number one, I had to show my passport to go to a Christian church, because Chinese nationals do not have freedom of religion. If that doesn't fire you up, it should, because that's what is at stake. You have to bring your actual Bible, because the Bible is banned online on the internet in China. People accuse me of being a book banner. They ain't seen nothing until they see what's going on in China. Historic facts that are banned from the internet. People that are just falling in line and saying this is the way it is. The inability to bear arms there. I mean, what I was able to see firsthand makes me the type of fighter that is going to recognize the enemy that we have in China and push back against it. And that's why I experienced that, to really see the rights and what's at stake here in America.
All right. So for the last 4 years, you've been pretty much dealing with education almost exclusively, except, of course, when you're on the slip board. So let's talk about education for a minute. Wyoming spends a tremendous amount of money, around $21,700 per student every year to go to school. So as superintendent of public instruction, what have you done? And I realize that your abilities at the top position are somewhat limited in this area. However, what have you done to reduce the cost of education?
Yeah, great question. Well, right now we're actually fighting. I'm named in a lawsuit that we're fighting against the WEA that is claiming that we're not paying enough for education.
Preposterous.
You're right. Wyoming has one of exactly. But they're not fans of mine, that's for sure. Wyoming, as you mentioned, has one of the most robust and generous funding systems in the country. We spend more per pupil than any state in our region and all but a handful of others nationwide. And so I believe strongly that the state has this one right, that we're fighting against the WEA that's making these claims, not to mention the work that the legislature is doing right now to make sure that our spending is appropriate. What I've really worked to do is create efficiencies both within my agency. We actually just went to Joint Appropriations Committee with a negative exception request. And we have tried to streamline things like career and technical education spending, make sure that we're cutting the red tape so that these dollars can get as closely to the classroom as possible. And then I've really been a big proponent of dismantling the U.S. Department of Education, because there are savings to be had there. You wouldn't believe the horror stories they have told me of the excess spending that's gone on in that agency, with the intent that more money is going to funnel to our states, directly to our states, who are the ones should be controlling education.
Okay. So with that amount of spending, and it's a huge amount. I mean, education takes up a big chunk of our state spending every single year. So why then if we're spending so much money, why are our test scores, why are students not scoring above, well, frankly, mediocre? Why can't we move that needle at all?
Well, David, as I'm sure you're aware, that it doesn't just get you results when you throw more money at things, contrary to some people's beliefs. What really moves the needle, and what we saw this year, we had increased results on our state assessment. It's when you double down on the things that matter. You stop spending time on trying to push political ideologies in the classroom, and you focus on making sure that kids can read, write, and do math. And so focusing on the basics, that's really the key here, and that we've really been pushing for. I think it just shows that the more money you throw at something, that doesn't always mean results. Now, we are doing better than most states in the country. That's a good thing, but we're staying pretty flat. And so we need to see growth. We have to do better. I've said that over and over again. That's why we're pushing hard at the state for supports for schools, for focusing on those things like literacy, right? Things that actually matter, not social emotional learning and DEI. That's not the key to success for our students after they leave the system.
Okay, now literacy, that's a big one. I've seen a couple of studies where just about half of our graduating eighth graders, I don't know if we still have eighth grade graduation anymore, but half of our eighth graders are not reading or writing at a proficient level. So what have you done to fix that?
Yeah, great question. So we promulgated rules regarding reading intervention and assessment, without getting too in the weeds and boring. That really initiates screeners for K through 3, making sure that we're screening kids and we know we can identify their difficulties earlier on. We've also got a big reform bill that's going to be before the legislative session, this budget session. As you see, a lot of conservative states, they're adopting the science of reading. Again, they're putting away all of this fluff and they're saying, okay, how do we actually use data to be able to direct children to how they learn to read? There's going to be pushback there, but we're raising the bar. We're doing that with the University of Wyoming College of Education, with the Teaching Standards Board of Certification. We have to raise the bar because in Wyoming, good is not good enough. And so that's really exciting work that we're working on right now.
All right. Now we're about to hit a budget session, in fact, in a couple of weeks. And the last few weeks have been a flurry of activity from the Joint Appropriations Committee. So should you be successful in your run for governor, I want you to talk to me about the role of the government in in the economy. They just voted to get rid of the Wyoming Business Council. In fact, unbeknownst to a lot of us, we actually have two agencies that do exactly the same thing. So there are a lot of ways that Wyoming state government is just shoveling cash to private entities. I want you to talk to me about the role of government in helping the economy. Does the government have a role? Should the government stay out of it? What's your thoughts on it?
Well, you're absolutely right. That's why when folks, are critical of us spending money on education savings accounts because it will go to private individuals or private schools, I direct them, all right, look how much money we are paying, or school districts or the state, in price tracks that we're just shoveling money to. And so I think there's a lot of cleanup that we can have across state government in terms of our contracts, in terms of, as you say, shoveling money to these individuals and picking winners and losers. Again, I'm more of a hands-off government economist. That's really what my background is, and in the invisible hand, as it's mentioned. And so as we look at things like economic development, here's the deal. Our mineral industry is the bulk of our economy in Wyoming. If we are not doing everything we can to support that industry and then ancillary industries that directly support it, then all we're doing is we're increasing the pressure on our mineral industry. And so that's where I think really honing in on how is this economic development, how is it directly related to the mineral industry? That's what I'm interested in, because that's who pays the bills in this state. That's who fuels the country. And so if anywhere, that's really the place that it should be. We can't just be handlers to companies and not even following up with them over time. And that's where I think a lot of this has become broken, because we don't have return on investment. We're not following up on, was this even successful? And these are fun handouts. Yeah, sure, you can go to an event and be excited and support these guys, but that's not really the role of government.
Fair enough. One of the big things that I think we really messed up on as a state is not solidifying our coal export port. What are you going to do as governor to fix that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something I was involved with during the Obama administration when I was working for Cloud Peak Energy, that coal company up in Gillette. I mean, our coal in Wyoming is incredible, an incredible asset, and in being able to ship that to Asia is a huge advantage for us. We fought like crazy to do that during the Obama administration, and now we have an administration that actually wants to work with us and help us to expand that. And so time is of the essence. Right? We have got to have a leader that is willing to take big risks and to work with the Trump administration to be able to get those projects done. And too often we have this excuse of it takes too long, or we have this issue or this holdup. Not when you have leaders that are really willing to roll up their sleeves and do the work. And so I think my experience within the coal industry, knowing how those projects can come to be, is going to be critical. That's why I have the endorsement of the president, and so I think that's absolutely on the horizon. There's so much more beyond that too, of how we make sure that we can produce our oil and gas. Particularly in a state like Wyoming, we're about half owned by the federal government, half the surface and half the mineral estate. And we have these kind of checkerboard areas where you have to be able to work with the feds to develop our state minerals or private minerals as well. And so having a leader that knows how to do that, how to put those plays together and actually develop, I think is going to be key, particularly with this administration and their support of those industries.
There's going to be a whole bunch of people that are running for governor. My thinking is when it's all said and done, heck, there might be 6 or 7. Why should people vote for you?
Well, I'm the true conservative in this race, and that's why I'm endorsed by President Donald Trump. I'm also the only candidate that has executive level experience running one of the largest state agencies that we have, having experience working in the energy business and in education. And with those 3 things, that's really what it takes to be a strong leader in this state. I'm also really that person that's not afraid to take risks and be that disruptor. That can make people uncomfortable, but we cannot continue along this status quo system of government and leadership. We need bold reform. We need bold change. And that's what I'm willing to bring. And President Trump has been very excited about ushering in this new generation of leaders. And I think that's what I represent, this breath of fresh air to Wyoming government. Let's reset and let's do things right.
All right. The budget that the governor proposed is going to be the largest one in the history of Wyoming. We said that last time around, but apparently we just keep adding to it. So what would be the first thing that you would cut? Have you been involved in the appropriations process as the superintendent of public instruction? Where do we spend too much? What should we do?
Well, I think we have far too many state agencies in Wyoming. I think that there are efficiencies that can be claimed there. And a lot of this too is, not always just cutting right off the top, but we got to do the work. It's hard. I mean, my agency, the natural thing is we just keep doing the same thing over and over again. A position is vacated, we rehire for it. We never analyze, do we need that position? Has our work changed? Can we consolidate? And so we need also leaders of state agencies that are willing to do that work and be along of this mission of, look, our government per capita is huge. We have got to rein that back. That's not the purpose of government. And this isn't an evil task of we just want to, slaughter and pillage all of the state government. It's just the fact that we've grown too much. And so that's what we need to have a reset. We need to say, what is the purpose here? What are we trying to accomplish here? And so I think there's a lot of savings that we can identify within state government. So many small things, but the small things add up to the big things. And that's the work that has to be put in. And too often we just, again, keep doing the same thing over and over again. And that's how we find ourselves in these situations.
All right. We broke a little bit of news in that piece I wrote about your endorsement, but I wanted to give you a chance to just kind of talk about how the Trump endorsement came about. There was a little bit of behind the scenes baseball there, but just go ahead and tell my viewers how that whole thing happened.
Well, I'm incredibly humbled to have the support of the president. I think it's clear that we have put Wyoming on the map as a leader in education. And that's exactly what I intend to do as governor. Too often, Wyoming just follows suit of some of these other strong states across the country. Wyoming needs to be a leader and step up. And that's what I've done in education. And I think that's been recognized by the Trump administration, by his allies. And we've been extremely supportive. I've fought for against sexually explicit library books. We've pushed to fight for the rights of women and girls, protecting biological girls in sports. That's been a huge one for me. We made historic change in school choice, historic. My very first session, we busted the door wide open with state authorized charter schools. We passed the education savings account, just significant reform that I think doesn't go unnoticed. And I'm a Trump Republican. As I mentioned, I think President Trump is excited to usher in this new generation of conservative leaders. I think that's why he's recognized me, and he knows that I believe in the America First policy agenda. And so very excited to have his endorsement.
Excellent. Well, we're pretty much run out of time, but I appreciate you taking the time to visit with me this morning. I know you're a pretty busy person running the Department of Education and running for governor, so thank you very much. If my viewers want to get a hold of you, how do they do that?
Absolutely. You can find our website, which is megandegenfelder.com. Contact there and happy to meet with individuals. I'm going to be covering this entire state. I will not stop until I've visited every community, talked with folks. That's really important to me. This isn't about just, throwing your name in the ring, and it's about visiting with Wyoming people that have to be represented by our next leader. And so I'll be pounding the pavement, working hard for every single vote.
Okay. All right. Well, Secretary Degenfelder or Superintendent Degenfelder, I appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll be talking again, and have a good afternoon.
Thanks, David.
All right, my friends, that was Superintendent of Public Instruction Megan Degenfelder, her first appearance on Cowboy state politics. And, I think that this is going to be a difficult governor's race simply because, well, the truth is, it's not going to be any different than any of the others. You're going to have lots of people jump in the race. And, it's hopefully it doesn't end up being another really, really, really small number of votes that get our next governor elected through the primary. But it's going to take a candidate that is really out in front. And already we've got a couple of what I think are pretty good candidates. The Superintendent Degenfelder, Brent Bean, he's been campaigning for like 10 years. Okay, not really 10 years. But yeah, I mean, he's been the one that's been the longest announced candidate. And I'm hoping that we'll have him on the program before too long. And then there's Eric Barlow, from the Wyoming left, the guy that, I mean, he probably voted with the Democrats more when he was in the legislature than anybody. I think if you average up his years, I'll have to do the math again, but I think he voted with the Democrats 85% of the time. But just like the question that I started out with Superintendent Degenfelder, that what does it mean to be a conservative? Now, you heard her answer, but just about everybody else has said that they are a conservative also. In fact, even Eric Barlow, in his announcement, he claimed to be a conservative, which that word, I mean, he keeps using that word. I do not think it means what he thinks it means, but they all claim that because they know that Wyoming citizens are conservative. And so what you have to do is get these candidates to define what that means. What does it mean to them? And once you get an answer, well, then you can hold them accountable to it. Now, there were a lot of questions that I asked the superintendent that, man, I think a lot of Wyoming citizens have every right to ask of all of these candidates. Specifically, hey, you say you're a conservative, but you've been voting for all these windmills. I mean, that's a serious question, and and you heard the superintendent's answer on that one. So anyway, my friends, we're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we'll finish up the program.